Welcome back to Restless. My name is Father Joseph Gill, priest of the Diocese of Bridgeport, and you've joined Diane and Joe and myself as together we restlessly seek the face of God. Maybe after our 150 episodes, I'd actually be able to say that properly. Restlessly.
No, maybe 300.
Maybe 300. Yeah, I don't know. But thank you so much for joining us. And we had a great joy a few months ago in our diocese where we ordained 6 men to the priesthood. That's really quite an incredible blessing. It's actually the biggest class since my class, which was 10 years ago. We had 7 guys.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and since then. And in the future, it's not looking as great. I think we have 1 guy next year and maybe a couple guys the year after. You know, but we'll take whoever we can get.
And then Joe maybe in, 6 years?
6 years?
4 of us, God willing, in 6 years if we all make it.
Okay.
Plus, it's hard to tell because the neocats do itinerancy. It's hard to tell how many of them would be ordained with us, if any.
That's true. Yeah. And is that a year, 2 years?
It's up to 3, I've heard.
Up to 3.
I think it's flexible. I don't know.
So actually explain to all our listeners who the neocats are.
Someone has to explain.
If you can.
Yeah. My understanding is that they are not a religious order, but they are a group of seminarians and priests who have mass sort of slightly different than us. It's like a religious community, sort of. I'm not doing a very good job of this so far.
You're right.
There are neocat parishes that form communities, and they do things a little bit differently, a little bit more charismatic, I think we could say.
Well, so it was founded in the 70s, in Spain, by a guy named by the name of Kiko.
You know more about it than I do.
He's like Cher, it's like a one word name or something. And and so it's kind of it's a lay movement that includes a lot of priests.
Yeah, and we have a number of seminarians who are part of this. They have their own seminary here in Stamford. And it's hard to tell when they'll be ordained. At least for me, I'm sure they have a much more clear picture of it. But
yeah, so they serve in the diocese, but also for their lay movement, and it's kind of a unique situation. Interesting. Yeah, definitely.
None of this is what we're here to discuss today.
How many years to be ordained for them?
Oh, I don't know. Well, because they have like an itinerancy thing where they kind of travel. I'm not really clear what it is, but it takes a couple years.
Yeah, they can go anywhere in the world.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think it's 1 to 3 years is the point. So like looking at from now, I wouldn't know who'd be ordained with me because it moves.
Yeah. There's a few elements of their masses that I found a little strange. One is that after the homily, anyone's free to say anything they want in the whole room. So they call them echoes, and so you never know what you're going to get.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, it's a unique flavor in the church, and it's good that our church is big, Definitely a lot of unique flavors.
Listeners at this point would be surprised if they clicked on a podcast about celibacy and are learning about the neocats.
Well, but they practice celibacy when they're priests.
Yes, they do. That's true.
So that is our topic. The fact is that obviously I'm a priest, and Joe is, God willing, going to be a priest. He's in seminary, and so we kind of wanted to talk about one of the biggest, kind of maybe an obstacle that a lot of people think of as one of the biggest challenges of the priesthood, which is celibacy. Giving up a wife and kids for the sake of the kingdom. And when we were texting about this earlier, Joe said, "Oh, I love celibacy." And I'm glad to hear that because he's going to hopefully live it for the rest of his life. And then Diane texts and says, "Yeah, I'll probably live it the rest of my life too."
Not by choice, but it's the way things are going now.
She is available and her cell phone number.
No, that's right.
Hey, I'm not above that.
If you want to date somebody famous in a very specific demographic among a very specific community of people, please contact Veritas Catholic Radio and get us Diane. That's right. Famous among tens of people in the Diocese of Bridgeport. Yeah, that's right.
She couldn't afford Catholic Match, so we decided to do a free ad.
Much better.
On Restless. But
this is allegedly a young adult podcast, so it'll be much,
Yeah, but I think our main demographic is actually
100%.
like
not young adults,
married moms and
yes,
things,
older
and that's great. Everyone's welcome to listen.
Well, if you have grandchildren or
that's right. Doesn't matter.
The only requirement is you have to be Catholic and have a job.
Yes.
And not be ugly.
Yes. Yeah.
That narrows it down, though.
That does. Yeah, that's why it's so hard.
Yeah.
Well, if you drop one of those standards, so think about which one is least important to you.
The not be ugly one.
Yes.
I don't know. That opens a hole.
It does. Cast a wider net.
That's right.
Yeah, that does.
But anyway, so when we're talking about
almost 10 minutes in.
Sorry, we're just talking about how some people love the banter and some people delete it. But so tell me about celibacy and like why do you think that the church requires it? And now obviously there's exceptions to that rule, right? I mean, right here in Norwalk, there's a priest. Well, it used to be a priest serving here at St. Mary's, St. Father Richard Chipola, who very holy priest, and he was married. I think was he a pastor of some Episcopal church?
I think it was Anglican or something.
Anglican, maybe?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Converted and was allowed to keep his wife and become a priest.
Yep.
And I've known a few others like that. So from your perspective, like, why does the church generally like require celibacy?
I mean, from my perspective, I feel like it's because you want the priest to be wholeheartedly devoted to Christ and the church, and I think that's difficult to do when you have a family. I mean, the scripture is clear about that too, in terms of like divided sort of interests. When you're married, you know, like you're thinking more about your husband or your wife and your kids, and when you're single or you're obviously a priest and you're not married, you have that focused attention that you wouldn't have because, I mean, just think about your own families, and I certainly have brothers, and their marriages are great, but their kids, it's like their life is chaos. Like, I mean, especially,
sure is.
You know, when you have
young,
little
right?
kids, your attention is you're so drained energy, just all of the sleeping issues or eating issues, and then, you know, obviously kids grow up and they become teenagers, but then you have, you know, bigger people, bigger issues, type of things. And so I can definitely see how your attention, you're vying for, I have my parish, you know, and these are the souls that I'm shepherding, right? Because I'm sure, Father Joseph, you see us as like your spiritual children, right?
Oh, very much so, yeah.
Yeah, and to be able to take that seriously, like I know that you do, I don't know. I just don't see how that you could do both successfully.
It's hard, yeah.
Yeah.
I just recently watched the movie The Sound of Freedom. Have you heard of this movie or seen it?
Heard of it, haven't seen it.
It's definitely a gut-wrenching and hard movie to watch because it's about this former FBI agent or Homeland Security agent named Tim Ballard, who feels called by God to basically like stop human child sex trafficking in third world countries. And so he ends up flying down to Honduras and Colombia and rescuing, you know, dozens and dozens of kids out of this terrible thing. But he risks his life. He has 6 kids back home. And the whole time I'm watching the movie, I'm like, well, this is really inspiring, but how can he legitimately go to this foreign country and literally risk his life every single day for these kids that aren't his own when he's got 6 kids back at home that he needs to deal with? Like, and I thought, you know, that is a great argument for priestly celibacy. Like, you know, I would have the freedom to do that, to be able to risk my life for something like that because I don't have to worry about those kids.
Yeah, I feel like someone inevitably gets the short end of the stick, right? So whether it's you're a priest and you're married and you have a wife and kids, like they get the short end of the stick. It's like it's just not fully 100% there.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there are people who could do it well, but I think the vast majority, it would be very difficult to be 100% invested.
In the Protestant world, there's such a kind of legendary reality of pastors' kids. Have you ever heard of that? Kind of like pastors' kids, PKs they call them. And it's kind of a broad generalization, but a lot of them go off the rails, you know, and start to just totally like screw up their life. And part of that, I'm sure, is spiritual warfare because the whole family is probably under a lot of warfare with the Protestant pastors doing good work. But part of it perhaps is the fact that their mom or dad is not around a whole lot. Yep.
Yeah, that's actually quite an interesting connection. Never really thought about that, but I've heard a lot of stories about people just kind of, you know, like rebellion or whatever.
Yeah. I don't know, Joe, what do you think?
I think that the distinction that Diane kind of hinted at before is really important, which is that those who are celibate are not single. Like you're not a bachelor father, right? You are married to the church, right? So you're not, celibacy isn't like being free to a single life, kind of do as you want. It's an acknowledgement that you are as a father is totally dedicated to his wife and his kids. You are totally dedicated to your bride, the church, and to your spiritual children. It's an important way to think about it, I think, because it's not oh, I have all this free time so I can like hang out in the afternoon, like play golf with my friends. It's like, no, like I have all this free time, like I have time that I would be spending with my wife and kids, but I don't have them. So that time is now spent serving the church, my bride, serving the people of the church, my children.
Yeah. Yeah. So a quick question though, because I wrestle with this a lot. Playing golf, if it's with your parishioners, is that like a bad thing? Because
Playing golf's not a bad thing.
Because you're doing what Pope Francis said, and like smelling like the sheep, right? Like if your parishioners play golf, you can meet them on the golf course. And
if your parishioners if your sheep smell like cashmere, then you have to play golf with them. That's fine.
I mean, we're in Fairfield County, right? I mean, you've got Greenwich, you've got Darien.
No, but I mean, I don't think. First of all, I think that a lot of times parents obsess with quality time with kids, which is obviously important, but also quantity of time is important. And I mean, we've talked about this before, but like you and I. Like you and I are friends, Father, and we've been friends for a long time. And part of my conversion came through the fact that I didn't just see you in the sanctuary at Mass, but like we would see you at youth group, and you come over to my house and with my family and stuff like that. And so, just being available to your people when it's not like I'm here to minister to you for 35 minutes, but it's like I'm here to be your friend for an hour. That I don't think we should undervalue that. That's important.
Yeah, no, that's true. Just like being with your flock and having that radical availability.
By the way, priests, like everybody needs free time. Everybody needs recreation. So if you're a golfer, golf. Like there's not like there's some people have this attitude that priests have to always be working, and that's just dumb. I mean, because parents also like, all right, you watch the kids tonight. I'm gonna go hang out with my friends, or like I'm gonna go do whatever. Like or I need a break. Like take them for an hour. Like that's a normal part of parenthood. There's no reason they should be any different.
Yeah, and I mean, especially as a priest, I think it is. I mean, I hear it from my friends of like certain pastors or priests who don't make themselves as available to their parishioners, in terms of like doing community things. I think it is very important for people to, like, young adults want to hang out with priests, actually. And I'm sure older people do too, just to like have a conversation with them, to get to know them. And I mean, in terms of like those people, like, I mean, it's an opportunity for you to like kind of evangelize or just encourage people in virtue and all that stuff, and just have normal conversations. But then you just don't know what the fruits of that are going to be later on when someone has an issue and they're like, oh, Father Joseph, like, I feel comfortable talking to you, that you're not going to, judge me or like whatever. You're going to give me the truth, but you're going to, like, I can come to you and have a conversation, as opposed to, someone that they don't know and they're like, well, I'm not going to let you in on the inmost depths of my heart and what I'm really thinking and feeling and my questions. Like, I feel like I can come to you and you won't judge me for whatever. I mean, you'll judge in the sense of like, you'll give me the truth, and it might be a hard truth, but you're not going to like look at me differently.
No, definitely not. Yeah.
So, and I can't say that I have that with every priest. So.
Well, I look at one of the great examples of course, American Catholicism is Father Michael McGivney. Blessed Michael McGivney, who, by the way, did you notice that, I don't know if you saw the news, but where was it? It wasn't New Haven. Was it Hartford? Just decided that they were going to like combine like 9 parishes into one.
Hartford,
or whatever.
Yeah.
And
both, I think, actually, but yeah.
Yeah, well, New Haven was like 13 into one. It was crazy. Yeah, but in New Haven, in Hartford, they combined like 9 parishes into one, and they named it Blessed Michael McGivney Parish, and I think that's the first parish named after him.
Oh wow! Okay.
In the world, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
But a local hero.
Yeah.
But I look at if you ever get the chance to read his biography, it's just simply called Parish Priest. It's a really great biography of him, and it talks about some of his activities. And like, for example, he was a big baseball player, and so he would organize baseball games for the young men in his parish. He would organize plays, a lot of like theatricals and stuff, and outings, because he realized that one of the biggest challenges, especially in New Haven in the, I guess it was the 1880s or something like that, was alcohol. And all of his parishioners would have all this free time because you work 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day, and then you're free, and they have nothing to do. So they would go and drink and get and that would lead to them abandoning their families and all kinds of other terrible vices. And so a lot of what he did was actually very social. It was like just being with the people, playing games, setting up fairs, doing this and that, and it sounded like he had a great time.
I mean, I think it goes a long way too, just in terms of building community. Like, for example, Father John Connaughton, where Joe's doing sort of a little summer residence there, I guess, at St. Cecilia's in Stamford. They just had a bonfire night. It was a Saturday night. They had food trucks, lawn games, live music, and I just thought, like, standing there just with my friends and then seeing all the young families, I thought it was such a great thing for a parish to do, and both of the priests from that parish were there kind of just talking to everyone. It's a great opportunity to get to know your parishioners, but also for the parishioners themselves, you're surrounding yourself with like-minded people, or people who are, striving for, no one's perfect, but we're on the road, right? So I think it's important too to like open up those avenues for friendships with other people, like authentic friendships. There were a bunch of teenage girls sitting around the campfire, and it's like, well, that's certainly better than like,
the alternatives.
The alternative. No, I was like,
absolutely.
this is beautiful. I wish I had that when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
So
but it used to be that the parishes was the center of your social life. And
Yeah.
it's not the way anymore. And then, I think you have a different view of the priest being your father if you have the parish as the center of your social life versus the priest being like your doctor or your lawyer, because you just go there, get your 1 hour a week on Sunday spiritual checkup, and leave. Right?
Yep. And I think a lot of people are really thirsting for that sort of
The real community.
For community, and
Well, because where else do you find it in the world?
Nowhere,
really. It's
nowhere.
really hard to find community.
Especially now with technology and phones and all that stuff. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
And we need community. We're made for community.
I reflect on, most of the adults I know have their friendship only through their kids.
Yeah.
Their kids are involved in activities, so they get to know other parents that are involved. So if you don't have kids, like none of us in this room have kids, where do you find community? You have to really be very intentional.
You do, and that's the beauty of parish, of the people. And it obviously takes effort, right? Like it takes effort on behalf of the priests to want to be involved, to want to do those things, and obviously they have help and councils and things like that. But I think it is super important for the spiritual growth of these children, essentially. So yeah.
So back to the topic of celibacy. So. As all three of us are currently living celibate lives, some of us in vows like myself, and some of us maybe not by choice. Involuntarily. Do you find it challenging? And like, especially, Joe, you're prepared to, maybe God willing, make that vow of celibacy. Is that something that's a little daunting? You're kind of like, I don't know if I can do this. This is a pretty big commitment. Could there be loneliness in the future?
Yeah, I think that's the big one, right? Because I guess I don't know this for sure. I kind of think that by the time you enter seminary, most people have discerned that they think they could live a celibate life, right? And obviously that's a grace God gives you, right? So if He calls you to live it, then He's going to give you the grace to live it. So for me, the bigger worry would be loneliness, right? And I could definitely see now just living in a parish for the first time, where it's like, okay, so I'm done with all this stuff, and it's like 7:00, and it's like, all my friends are too far away to go hang out with. I guess I'm just going to hang out by myself for like an hour, right? So I definitely see that that's a possibility. But I also know that I've only been here for 4 days, and so it's not surprising that I don't have a lot of friends in the area. But the good priests that I know, they don't have that problem, I think that if you're a good and holy priest who really is available to your people, they will respond in kind. You won't have to be lonely. Interestingly, I think a lot of priests tend to actually be introverts. And they actually want to be alone more. I'm not an introvert, so I don't want to be alone more. And so that's something that I have thought about, and actually did come up. This is going to be a future episode, or perhaps a previous episode. We never really know. But
we don't schedule these things.
Yeah, but I just came off of a 30-day silent retreat, and it's interesting that one of the things that came up only once, and then that was it, was this question about loneliness. And I was meditating on when God created Eve out of Adam's side, and just it's not good for man to be alone. And when I was praying with it, I got just this sense of like peace about it. Like God knows that it's not good for me to be alone, so I won't be. And that's it. You know what I mean? And that was enough. So that's why I look at it. I mean, you're now 10 years ordained, and I think your seminary lasted 27 years, right?
Yeah, I've been celibate my whole life.
Yeah. So how from that perspective, looking back, how do you look at it?
I think you're absolutely right that the people do respond in kind. I'm at the point where I kind of want a little less social interaction, because it's like literally every night of the week it's a different blessing, and not even meetings. It's like people come over for dinner, let's do this fun thing, let's do that. So it's a great blessing. Don't get me wrong, I'm incredibly grateful.
Everybody stop inviting him to things. He doesn't like you anymore.
No, not true.
If it gets tired, like you just need, even if you're an extrovert, I feel like you need some time to recharge,
Yeah. When I was younger, I'd say the hardest time was always Sunday afternoons, because you have kind of this high of Sunday morning. Seeing everybody is great, and I am an introvert who loves people.
Right.
So it's exhausting for me, but I love it. And so Sunday mornings was great. And then Sunday afternoon was just kind of this crash of like everyone's now home with their family, and I'm like going back to this empty building.
Yeah.
But what helped me was to understand that you can turn loneliness into solitude, which I think is being alone with the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a real powerful invitation at that moment when I feel that lack, that emptiness. Like, Lord, come in because I'm yours, because I believe, I belong to you.
Yeah.
And I've had some really powerful times of intimacy in the midst of loneliness, intimacy with the Lord, because he wants that space in our life. And so even as a priest who is very busy and very social, I need to not forget to take that time to be alone with God.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I feel the same way, because I can certainly, in my mid-30s, you're on the high of like doing all these social things, but then when you come back and you're kind of alone and you have these thoughts in your head of why, it's just self-pity and like why can't I find someone and things like that. But I think it is, like if you really, I've been trying to lean into kind of divine providence, right? Of just everything does happen for a reason, whether it's God's actual will or his permissive will, but that he's working through it. And that as much as I don't like, this is not what I envisioned for my life, like that, trusting that it is needed for my purification, in terms of just like at the end of the day, even if you were to get married and have kids, which I hope that is the deepest desire of my heart. Like you can't make an idol of those things either, of marriage or the person or your kids. And so like at the end of the day, like God has to be your first love, the highest love. And I think in those moments of like loneliness, and especially forced sort of circumstances, he's making me realize that like, no, I actually can fulfill all of your desires, and I just ask the Lord to teach me to trust that you can fulfill all of my desires, because I think it's pretty easy to make things into idols, whether or not we actually perceive that we're doing that or not. That's really what it is when we're like wanting other things or like trying to fill these holes in our hearts with things other than God, even good things.
Yeah. And we can be so active that we do forget just the receptive intimacy.
Yeah. But I do love the distinction you made between like loneliness and solitude, because I think those are invitations to, you can either like dwell in your loneliness and kind of go into the self-pity thing, or you can just like be with the Lord. And it really does, just like simple prayers like, Jesus, do something here. And he does. he really does.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's for me one of the great gifts of celibacy, is having the ability to have a richer prayer life than most lay people who are married would be allowed to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I look at my sister who's got 3 kids, and she can't get to daily mass. She can't do a daily holy hour. I'm sure she would love to.
Yeah.
but you don't have that opportunity. So
yeah, and that's what I think, just even being a single person too. Like I look at this was not the path that I would have chosen for myself, but I am very grateful because I have such a deeper relationship with the Lord, the ups and the downs, and like being able to go to daily mass and adoration and like teach RCIA and serve in the young adult community and stuff. It's like people who are married can't do that. So you have to believe that like God has a specific path for you and a calling, and that he's going to give you grace and like, and to not, I need to take my own advice, but like to not worry so much about like the timing and the way that he's doing that, because it's tailored to your salvation.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one of the big, perhaps, elephants in the room with celibacy, particularly priestly celibacy, is that a lot of people say that it's unnatural and that it could have led to some of the scandals of the past 20 years. So, I mean, how do you respond to that? And first, I mean, like Joe, when you bring this up to your friends, the fact that you're studying to be a priest, you must get, especially friends perhaps who aren't as as profoundly Catholic, deeply in their faith, you must get a few eyebrows raised and be like, celibacy is unnatural, it's weird, what's...
Yeah, but I mean, that's dumb.
That's dumb.
I mean, it's specifically as regards the question about the scandals, right? Because there's so many other groups, and it's becoming more and more obvious that various, evangelical groups, not to mention like public schools, there's all sorts of non-celibate groups that have problems with sex abuse. It turns out this is just a huge problem in Western culture that really hit the Catholic Church early.
Yeah.
Right.
Which
doesn't obviously doesn't excuse any of the awful. And I'd like to do an episode about this at some point because I think there's a lot to say about it. But yeah, there's no demonstrated connection between celibacy and this sort of thing. Yeah.
So I would disagree with you slightly. Slightly.
Okay. That much?
Just a little bit. Just because you're absolutely right. I don't think celibacy leads to deviation, but I think the fact that the priesthood is celibate has, in the past, not now, now they're much better with psychological screening, but in the past, men could hide some sexual deviancy because it's celibate.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but that's just to reverse causality, right? It's not, celibacy isn't causing deviation. Deviation is causing people to enter a life of alleged celibacy. Right.
Alleged, right. So
right.
It's not.
And I also think that part of it is that those priests allow themselves to be made lonely. Right. And so loneliness breeds these things, I think, more than celibacy does. But you said that sometimes people will say, oh, well, it's unnatural. I mean, it's supernatural. It's not unnatural, right? It requires grace to live this way. But it's also the way that you're going to live in heaven. Like,
that's
you listener, not you, Father Joe. Like, everybody is going to live this way in heaven. What this is for us, what it is for everybody is a sacramental sign of the reality of the beatific vision, right? Which is, you like Diane said, ultimately God will be enough for you. God is enough for you in this life, and hopefully we achieve that in this life. But anybody who is with him in heaven will truly experience that joy, the joy that comes only from him. So
that's a great point. In fact, there's a theological term for that, being an eschatological sign.
Right.
That like our life points to the reality of eternity, because God bless all the married couples out there. Sorry, bad news. You're not going to be married to your spouse in heaven in the same way.
It's actually good news. It's in the Gospels.
And maybe for some of you living it out, it's good news. You're like, I can't wait to get out of this. No.
Yeah. Somebody just said, thank God.
But yeah. No, and again, you'll have a close relationship with your spouse, but
Sure.
the point of marriage, matrimony, is for the duties of the mother. So it's the whole point is oriented towards procreation and sanctification of your spouse, neither of which you'll have to do in heaven. So in heaven, everyone will live celibacy, which means that God is the be-all and end-all of your life. And through God, you'll love everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
You know something else? This again came up when I was on the retreat. I was praying about the Nativity, and it struck me that there's nothing sterile about the Holy Family. Because you'd think, like, oh, well, so Mary and Joseph have no marital relations. Jesus is not conceived because of Joseph. He's conceived by the Holy Spirit. And so you would think there'd be some sort of sterile quality to it, but there's not. Like, their love is completely fecund, like normal love is. Like, their love for each other brings forth Jesus in a unique way, but not just in the moment of his conception or in the moment of his birth, but throughout his life. So celibacy isn't sterile. Like, it brings forth life. It's just different.
Well, there's a prayer for one of the feast days of Our Lady that says, just as, Lord, you have made her virginity uniquely fruitful. And
right.
I've always loved that, because, yes, your celibacy and our virginity should be fruitful, spiritually fruitful.
Yeah.
And what I do for souls in baptism is the same thing that fathers do in generating new life.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I think it probably makes it easier to give up sort of the temporal, right? When you have sort of that vision, that beatific vision, and sort of, like what the end goal is in mind. Because I think it's not like a repression of desire. It is a supernatural grace, but ultimately, like, this is, just what Joe said, it's like how we're going to be living in heaven. So there's a joy to that. And there's a lot more to life than unchastity, I guess, and
sexual pleasure. Yeah. A lot more to life. I certainly.
Yeah. Just to be clear, sorry, sexual pleasure isn't necessarily unchaste, right? Just to be clear that there's,
right.
We're all called to chastity. Just to be super clear about this, right? Yeah.
Right, we're all called to chastity.
And the marital embrace is a sign of,
right.
Yes, of our ultimate destination, like being wedded to God, but there are just different paths.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And I think too, I think a lot more people are being called to celibacy than want to acknowledge it, because all the time I'll talk to guys, young guys, and be like, hey, have you thought about the priesthood? And they say, well, no, I like girls. I said, that's not a sign you're not called to the priesthood, okay?
Right.
Because every normal man likes girls. That's not, I am very attracted to women, and I very much feel called to marriage.
Yeah.
Because that's a natural call on everyone's heart. But
Yeah.
some people, in addition to that natural call, have a supernatural call to give that up.
Yep.
So just the fact that someone feels a desire for marriage, a desire for kids, does not mean you're not called to celibacy.
And I've heard that in terms of just like religious sisters. I'm not sure with priests. One of the screening questions kind of is like, do you feel called? Like, do you feel a desire for marriage? And I was talking to a person who had just entered, a sister, and she basically. Like the person who was interviewing her, essentially, like if the answer had been no, that would have been like a red flag,
Sure.
like if she's it's because that is sort of just the way that God built us. So
Right.
Yeah, it
Because
doesn't mean that you're not called to religious life.
It's the question: do you have the capacity to love?
Yeah.
Really, and the capacity to sacrifice a natural good for a supernatural one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But nevertheless, it is challenging. So, for those who perhaps are maybe living celibacy by choice or maybe not by choice, which a lot of our young adults, are just simply in the state where they're not married yet and therefore have to live a temporary celibacy, what are some very practical, concrete tips to live that out? Because in today's hypersexualized culture, it's very difficult to remain chaste and to remain, celibate. What are your thoughts, tips?
I mean, I think it really depends on sort of where you're at in terms of like, are you single or dating? Like, obviously, like you have to be careful with your phone usage. I know that porn is obviously a big thing amongst, well, just all ages. But even in just relationships, I think if you're pursuing someone or whatever, it's a matter of just chastity, right? Of making sure that you're on the same page with someone else about your standards for what is appropriate, like sort of chastity of heart as well. It's not just a physical thing.
Yeah, chastity of heart, that's a big thing.
Yeah, I think it's especially for women, because you can get on the sort of the, I don't know.
Emotional... attachments that then draw your heart and your body.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's much more easy for women to get attached like emotionally to men than maybe for men. But yeah.
But no, I mean, I can tell you as a priest, you still have to guard your heart. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. There are very beautiful women in the parish, many of whom start to really kind of open up to you.
Yeah.
And be very vulnerable, and you have to guard your heart and say, look, no, I'm not free to date someone. I'm not free to pursue another heart.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like the temptation or whatever that person, not necessarily, you can't like eliminate everything, but you just have to, you kind of have to like recollect and remember sort of, like especially with chastity, I think the biggest thing if you're single and you're called to marriage is to remember that like at the end of the day, that, like, sex is meant for marriage, right? And it's saying I am totally yours. So if you are not married to someone, it's a lie of the body to say I'm giving you my whole self, but really not really, because you're not actually married to the person, even if you're engaged. So to remember that, that this is meant to be a total self-give. It's meant to be an image of the Trinity, the total giving of the Father to the Son to the Father, and that can only be done in the context of marriage. So if you have that, like, as the as something that in your head, I think it makes it easier, when the temptations come, right? And you have to, like, to deal with this, to remember, like, okay, I have a reason not to do this.
Yeah, that's true. Joe, any thoughts?
I just think that it's important to remember that the moment you make the decision to be unchaste is not the actual moment you make that decision. That decision was made probably hours or days before, by which I mean, like, be aware of what we call near occasions of sin, right? Don't put yourself in a position that you're good. Don't put yourself in a position to make a difficult decision, right? Like if you're dating somebody and you don't trust yourself to be alone with them, like late at night or something, well then don't be alone with them late at night.
Right.
Like know yourself, right?
Yeah.
And be honest with yourself about those things, because we usually, when we're like wrestling with decision, we actually made the decision 10 hours ago.
That's
and we're just like pretending to drag our feet because we feel like we have to. Just and I'm not this it's not meant to be judgmental. It's just how humans are.
No, that's absolutely true.
But just be aware of that in yourself and guard against it.
Yeah, custody of the eye is an old virtue that's still very necessary.
Yeah, and I think you just have to be aware of where your heart's at, because chastity is like, it's not just physical boundaries, it's also like, like how are you looking at the person? Are you looking at them as an object? Are you like looking at them as, oh, they're holding my hand and I'm getting this like sense pleasure that's all about me? It's like it's not necessarily black or white. Like there are certain things obviously that you cannot do, but like you really need to assess like what are your motivations, because chastity goes much deeper, I think, than a lot of people think. It's not a series of like do's and don'ts. Like that's part of it, but it's much deeper.
Right. Because it's the freedom to love.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what celibacy is about, what chastity is about, what marriage is about, what life is about, is the freedom to love. So thank you for joining us on this episode of Restless. My challenge for you is those of you who are single to, first of all, discern whether God's calling you to celibacy, to that beautiful gift of giving your life completely and totally to Him in love. If you're married, to live chastity and to pray for an increase in vocations to the priesthood and religious life, and for the increase of those who are consecrated single in the midst of the world, so that they may live out their chastity and their celibacy with the generosity of heart that God wants for them. You can find us on Veritas Catholic Network, 1350 AM and 103.9 FM, and wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in next time. God bless you.